One of the most extraordinary things about history's most extraordinary musician is that this man's music, against which we tend to measure much of the achievement in the art of music in the last 2 centuries, had absolutely no effect on either the musicians or the public of his own day. Glenn Gould. When Johann Sebastian Bach arrived in Leipzig in the spring of 1723 to take up the prestigious post of cantor of the St. Thomas School and Church, he was entering an environment in which he was viewed with ambivalence. The job had been offered to Telemann and then the redoubtable Christoph Graupner, but after both declined, the town council turned to Bach, with one councilman complaining that, since we cannot get the best, then we will have to settle for average. Nonetheless, Bach threw himself into his new work. As the person responsible for providing Leipzig's 4 churches with music, he now had an opportunity to fulfill an artistic mission he'd nurtured since his early 20s, to establish what he called a well-regulated church music to the glory of God. The amount of sacred music he composed during his first 6 years in Leipzig remains difficult to fathom. He wrote 4 full cantata cycles, each covering the entirety of the liturgical calendar, as well as his 2 large-scale dramatic masterworks, his Passions according to St. John and St. Matthew. What he produced during this short period has been described as the most profound accompaniment to the Christian rituals of birth, marriage, and death in all of Western culture. But by the end of the 1720s, Bach's frustrations were mounting, the result of a punishing workload and a salary that often left his family's needs unmet. He'd also discovered that the resources at his disposal were inadequate to his assigned tasks. Services and performances regularly took place without full complements of vocalists and instrumentalists, and Bach described many of these musicians as incapable. This prompted a series of squabbles with the town council, which was split between those who wished to build Leipzig's prestige as a musical center and a faction that wanted their cantor to focus greater attention on education. The breaking point came in 1730. On August 23rd, Bach submitted a petition that provided a detailed list of the personnel necessary to provide good music in the city's churches. The town council didn't even deign to respond. As a result, Bach's priorities began to change. In 1729, he'd taken on the directorship of the Collegium Musicum, a society of student musicians at Leipzig University, and he began to write more instrumental music and secular vocal works. His production of new sacred music slackened, and he increased his use of so-called parody technique, a process dating back to the Renaissance in which a secular work was given a sacred text and repurposed as an appropriate complement to worship. It was within this context that Bach composed his Christmas Oratorio in 1734. Consisting of 6 cantatas that were to be performed individually on successive Christmas feast days in Leipzig at the end of 1734 and the beginning of 1735, the work is, in a sense, a precursor of Wagner's Ring Cycle. In their consecutive order, the cantatas describe Jesus' birth, the Annunciation to the shepherds, the adoration of the shepherds, the circumcision and naming of Jesus, the journey of the Magi, and finally, the adoration of the Magi. Most of the oratorio's music is fashioned from 3 recently composed secular cantatas Bach had written to honor members of the Saxon royal family, but any assumption that this indicates a lack of creative initiative is misplaced. Transcription was commonplace in Bach's time, and he routinely made arrangements of his own works. He brought the same inspiration and ability that produced his original music to his transcriptions, and the coherency of the Christmas Oratorio is a testament to the characteristic nature of his profound artistic judgment. This unparalleled discernment manifests itself in every aspect of the piece. On a granular level, the seamlessness with which Bach replaced secular texts with sacred libretti reveals both his unsurpassed skill in word setting and the degree to which religious sensibilities shaped 18th century German secular culture. And in a manner that's typical of his large-scale sacred works, the musical architecture of the Christmas Oratorio is masterfully sustained sustained by its key relationships and the dramatic associations Bach drew from them, beginning with the first cantata's celebratory D major, the key that facilitated spectacular trumpet writing, which then moves to the more pastoral G major for the gentler second cantata, before returning to D major for the third, to round out the half of the oratorio written for the year's closing days. The arrival of the new year is welcomed by the fourth cantata's hearty F major and the hunting horns that characteristically accompany it, followed by the glittering A major of the fifth that prepares for the ultimate return in the sixth cantata of the oratorio's home key of D major and its attendant festive atmosphere. In a final masterstroke, Bach closes the work by bringing back the first chorale heard in the opening cantata. But whereas it was then set to words of doubt atop melancholic harmonies, now it is cast within the context of a jubilant chorale fantasia that celebrates the victory of faith over death and sin, and brings this monumental representation of Bach's life-affirming art to a close in a blaze of glory.